January 5th, 1947. A charter plane carrying 21 passengers punches through a wall of snow somewhere over southern New Jersey. The pilot cannot see the runway. He cannot see the trees. The aircraft clips a stand of pines near Millville, cartwheels through frozen timber, and tears itself apart in the darkness. 3 people die on impact. 18 more are pulled from the wreckage, broken and bleeding into the snow. Among them is the world featherweight champion. His left leg is shattered. 2 vertebrae in his spine are fractured. Doctors at the local hospital take one look at the x-rays and deliver the verdict. He will never walk normally again. He will certainly never fight again. The champion is 24 years old. His name is Willie Pep, and his professional record at that moment is 134 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. He has been virtually untouchable for 7 years. Sports writers call him the greatest defensive boxer alive. Opponents say fighting him is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. And now he is lying in a hospital bed in rural New Jersey, encased in plaster from his ribs to his toes, listening to doctors explain that his career is over. But the doctors did not know who they were talking to. It took 10 impossible chapters to build a man tough enough to survive that crash and what he did next. And the first one begins on the streets of Hartford, Connecticut. Number 1. The kid from the shoeshine corner. His real name was Guglielmo Papaleo, and he was born on September 19, 1922, in Middletown, Connecticut. His parents, Salvatore and Maria, were Sicilian immigrants. Salvatore had come from the small town of Rosalini, Maria from nearby Melilli, and they had crossed an ocean looking for something better than the rocky hillsides of southern Sicily. What they found was the Great Depression. Salvatore worked for the Works Progress Administration for $15 a week, digging roads and laying pipe in the Connecticut cold. $15 barely covered rent and groceries. There was nothing left over for anything else. So young Guglielmo went to work. He was 10 years old, selling newspapers and shining shoes on the streets of downtown Hartford, fighting other boys for the best corners. Not play fighting, real fighting. Fists and elbows and bloody noses on the sidewalk, because the good corners meant the difference between eating and going hungry. He was small, fast, and absolutely relentless. He almost never lost. By the time he was 14, a friend named Johnny Duke dragged him into a local boxing gym. Connecticut allowed amateur fighters to compete for money, and the kid from the shoeshine corner discovered something remarkable. He could make more in one Friday night at a small arena than his father earned in an entire week. When Salvatore found out his son was fighting, Maria was terrified. But Salvatore did the math. If the boy was making that much on Fridays, his father figured, maybe he should see about fighting on Tuesdays as well. He scissored Papaleo into the short, punchy, palindromic name Pep, an Americanization, like Rocky Marciano trimming Marchigiano, or Jake LaMotta's family dropping the space. The kid from Sicily became Willie Pep, and Willie Pep became a fighter. Number 2. The secret he carried for years. Pep tore through the Connecticut amateur circuit like a brush fire. Over roughly 2.5 years, he compiled a record of 59 wins and only 3 losses. He won the Connecticut amateur flyweight title in 1938 and the bantamweight title in 1939. He was fast, he was clever, and he was beating grown men while he was still a teenager. But one of those 3 losses haunted him. In 1938, in the attic of a feed store in Norwich, Connecticut, a skinny kid billed as Ray Roberts climbed through the ropes and proceeded to give Pep the worst beating of his young life. Roberts outweighed him by 20 pounds and was all over him from the opening bell. Pep could not figure out how to make the kid miss. It was humiliating. He did not learn the truth until years later. Ray Roberts was not Ray Roberts. He was Walker Smith Jr., a New York amateur boxing under a fake name because New York fighters were not allowed to compete for money in Connecticut. The boxing world would eventually know him as Sugar Ray Robinson, the man most historians call the greatest fighter who ever lived. Pep had lost to the greatest of all time as a teenager, in an attic, for pocket change. Robinson took home $20 for winning. Pep took home $9 for losing. He would later joke about it with a grin. "They call Ray Robinson the best fighter. Pound for pound," Pep would say. "I am the best fighter, ounce for ounce." But that loss taught him something critical. There would always be someone who could outpower him. He needed to become something else entirely. He needed to become unhittable, and that is exactly what he did. Number 3, 62-0. Pep turned professional in the summer of 1940 at age 17, and he did not lose. He beat Joey Marcus in his debut at Bulkley Stadium in Hartford, and then he just kept winning. He fought mostly in Connecticut and Massachusetts, small venues and modest purses, building a record that began to look almost fictional. 10 wins, 20 wins, 30 wins, 40 wins, no losses. His managers, Lou Viscusi and trainer Bill Gore, built his career with surgical patience, matching him carefully, letting the skills sharpen fight by fight. By the time he had 52 wins and 0 losses, they decided he was ready for the biggest stage in boxing. On November 20th, 1942, the 20-year-old Pep stepped into the ring at Madison Square Garden to face Chalky Wright for the World Featherweight Championship. Wright was the defending champion, experienced and dangerous. Pep was a kid from Connecticut with no national reputation. He outboxed Wright over 15 rounds and took his title. He was one of the youngest world champions in 40 years. The sports writers who had ignored him suddenly could not look away. Here was a fighter who did not slug. He did not brawl. He danced. He feinted. He made world-class opponents swing at air and then cracked them with countershots they never saw coming. And then he kept winning. 62 consecutive fights without a loss to start a professional career. The streak finally ended on March 19, 1943, when former lightweight champion Sammy Angot outpointed him over 10 rounds at the Garden in a non-title bout. Pep was back winning 10 days later. And then he reeled off another 72 fights without a defeat, a combined stretch of dominance that the sport had almost never seen. Remember that hospital bed in New Jersey? Remember those fractured vertebrae and that shattered leg? This is the fighter those doctors were telling would never walk again. A man who had lost only once in 134 professional fights. The most unhittable boxer on the planet. Number 4, Willow the Wisp. They called him Willow the Wisp. The nickname came from New York Journal American writer Bill Coram, and it stuck because it was perfect. A will-o'-the-wisp is a ghostly light that floats over marshes at night. You can see it, but you can never catch it. You reach for it, and it vanishes. That was Willie Pep in a boxing ring. His style was unlike anything the sport had produced. He relied on footwork so fast it looked choreographed, lateral movement that left opponents lunging at empty space, subtle shoulder rolls, upper body slips, timed to the millisecond, and an endless vocabulary of feints that kept the other man guessing. He would switch from orthodox to southpaw and back again in the middle of an exchange. He would pivot on one foot and reappear at an angle his opponent did not know existed. He was not a puncher. His knockout rate was about 27%, modest for a champion. Many of his stoppage wins came from opponents collapsing in exhaustion rather than from single devastating blows. But he did not need power. He needed precision, timing, and the ability to make the other man miss so completely that it broke his spirit. Opponent Kid Campeche walked back to his corner after losing to Pep and said fighting Willie Pep is like trying to stomp out a grass fire. Others described it as battling a man in a room full of mirrors. Chalky Wright reportedly growled at Pep during one of their fights to stand still and fight. Pep just smiled and kept moving. Don Dunphy, the great boxing broadcaster known as the voice of boxing, called Pep the best boxer he ever saw. He was so clever, Dunphy said, he could come up to an opponent from behind. And here is where the legend gets strange. Because there is a story about Willie Pep that has been repeated so many times, it has taken on the weight of gospel truth. A story about a single round of boxing that became the most famous round in the history of the sport. But the truth behind that story is more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. We will get there at number 6. Number 5. The Crash and the Comeback. Now we return to that frozen night in January of 1947. The charter flight from Miami to Hartford. The snowstorm. The pines near Millville, New Jersey. 3 dead, 18 injured. And the world featherweight champion pulled from the wreckage with a broken left leg and 2 fractured vertebrae. They put him in a plaster cast from his ribs to his toes. For 5 months he could not walk, could not train, could barely move. The Hartford Courant reported 2 split and chipped vertebrae in addition to a fractured leg. Other accounts mentioned chest injuries. Doctors told him his career was lugs finished. Pep's response has become one of the great one-liners in sports history. "Yeah," he said, "I am through flying at night." When the cast came off in May of 1947, he did not ease back in. He went straight to the gym. On June 17th, just over 6 months after the crash that was supposed to end everything, Willie Pep stepped back into the ring in Hartford and outpointed Victor Flores over 10 rounds. He was not the same fighter. Observers noticed he had lost a step. He struggled to a majority decision over Archie Wilmer and was knocked down by Pedro Biesca. But he won. Every single time, he won. He went undefeated in all 10 of his 1947 bouts. A man who was told he would never walk again fought 10 times in 6 months and did not lose once. It remains one of the greatest comebacks in the history of sports. Not just boxing, all of sports. And it would set up the most dramatic rivalry of his career. Number 6. The round he never threw. This is the story that made Willie Pep immortal in the minds of casual fans. On July 25, 1946, Pep fought Jackie Graves in Minneapolis. According to legend, before the 3rd round, Pep told the ringside reporters he was going to win the round without throwing a single punch. Not one punch of anger. Then he went out and did exactly that. He used pure defense, feinting, footwork, and ring generalship so masterful that 2 of the 3 judges scored the round in his favor, without him ever throwing a punch. It is the most famous story in boxing history. And it is almost certainly a myth. Contemporary newspaper accounts from that night tell a different story. The Minneapolis Star described the 3rd round as toe-to-toe slugging, with Pep inflicting his best punishment with a right to the body. That does not sound like a man who never threw a punch. ESPN historian Don Stradley traced the tale to a local radio broadcaster named Don Riley, who covered the fight for station WMIN. The story did not surface in print until decades later, when Red Smith popularized it in his 1975 New York Times column, and Bert Sugar amplified it further. Historian Craig Wegner interviewed more than a dozen eyewitnesses from that night. They all say it is a crock, Wegner reported. By all accounts, Pep was fighting in the 3rd round, not hiding behind the referee. Even Bert Sugar eventually hedged. Instead of saying Pep won a round without throwing a punch, Sugar said, "Say he won a round without landing one." There is a difference. Jackie Graves himself could not remember clearly, but later joked that if Pep could win a round without landing a punch, why did he not do that for the entire fight? Here is what made the legend stick. Pep himself carried a newspaper clipping about the fight in his wallet for decades. He would show it to young reporters and say, "That is all you need to know about me." Skeptics believe Pep may have planted or embellished the article himself. But it did not matter. The story was too good to fact-check. It captured something true about Willie Pep, even if the specific event never happened. He was so elusive, so impossibly skilled, that people genuinely believed he could win a round without throwing a punch. That is its own kind of greatness. Number 7. The night the Wisp got caught. Sandy Sadler was everything Willie Pep was not. Born Joseph Sadler in 1926. Raised in Harlem, Sadler was unusually tall for a featherweight at about 5'8", with freakish punching power that would eventually produce 103 knockouts in 144 career wins. The Ring magazine would rank him the 5th greatest puncher of all time, pound for pound. On October 29, 1948, Sadler climbed into the ring at Madison Square Garden as a heavy underdog against the great Willie Pep. Pep entered the fight at 134 wins, 1 loss and 1 draw. He was the overwhelming favorite. It lasted 4 rounds. Sadler cut Pep in the 1st, dropped him in the 3rd, and knocked him out cold at 2 minutes and 38 seconds of the 4th. It was the first time in 137 professional bouts that Willie Pep had been stopped. Only his 2nd loss ever. The press was brutal. They pronounced him all washed up. The plane crash had taken too much out of him. The legs were gone. The reflexes were gone. The magic was gone. At 26, Willie Pep was finished. Everyone was certain of that, except Willie Pep. Number 8. The Greatest Night. February 11th, 1949. Madison Square Garden. The rematch that nobody expected Pep to survive. let alone win. 19,097 fans packed the arena, the first sellout at the Garden since 1946. They had paid $87,000 to watch a coronation. Sadler was supposed to put the old champion away for good. The bell rang and Pep came out throwing. He reportedly fired roughly 37 jabs in the first round alone, a blinding rate of speed that had Sadler looking bewildered from the opening seconds. This was not the faded, cautious fighter from October. This was the will of the Wisp at his absolute peak. For 15 rounds, Pep put on what many historians consider the single greatest boxing performance of the 1940s. He boxed brilliantly all the way, slipping Sadler's power shots, pivoting out of danger, countering with combinations so fast the crowd could barely follow them. Both men were smeared with blood by the middle rounds, but Pep never stopped moving, never stopped working, never gave Sadler a clean look at his chin. The Associated Press scored it 9 rounds to 6 for Pep. He won back the Featherweight Championship, and the Ring magazine named it the Fight of the Year for 1949. Pep himself would later call it his greatest night, not just because he won, but because he won against the one man who had proven he could be destroyed. He had been knocked out, written off, and declared finished, and then he danced for 15 rounds and took back his crown. Number 9. The war that shamed the sport. But Sadler was not going away, and the next 2 chapters of their rivalry would descend into something mean, ugly. Fight 3 came on September 8, 1950, at Yankee Stadium. 38,000 fans paid $262,000 to watch, both records for a featherweight bout. Pep was boxing beautifully, ahead on all 3 scorecards after 7 rounds when the fight devolved. Both men began fouling openly, thumbing, heeling, toe-stomping, wrestling. Sadler dropped Pep in the 3rd with a shot that may or may not have been clean. By the 8th round, Pep could not continue. He retired on his stool with a dislocated left shoulder he blamed on Sadler's wrestling. The title changed hands again. Fight 4, on September 26, 1951, at the Polo Grounds, was even worse. Nat Fleischer of the Ring magazine called it a spectacle of wrestling, heeling, eye gouging, tripping, thumbing, and every dirty trick known to the old-timers. Referee Ray Miller was knocked to the canvas, trying to separate them. One sports writer called it the worst exhibition of unsportsmanlike conduct he had ever witnessed in a bout anywhere. Pep was again ahead on the cards when he quit after the 9th round, his right eye swollen shut and his vision badly impaired. The New York State Athletic Commission suspended both men. The Ring would later name it the 6th dirtiest fight of all time. Here is what matters about those last 2 fights. The fouling was largely defensive escalation on Pep's part. Sadler's roughhouse infighting forced Pep to respond in kind, and whenever Pep abandoned his beautiful boxing to brawl, he was playing directly into the bigger man's hands. As Pep himself reflected, "Whenever I lost my head, I was playing right into his hands. This was my mistake." The final scorecard between them read 3 wins for Sadler, 1 for Pep. But years later, they became friends. They boxed exhibitions together after retirement and spoke warmly of each other. The hatred had been real inside the ropes. Outside them, it faded into mutual respect between 2 men who understood what the other had survived. Number 10. First your legs go. After the Sadler Wars, Willie Pep kept fighting. He always kept fighting. He defended what remained of his reputation through the early 50s, lost the title recognition he had left, and continued taking bouts for money he desperately needed. He fought all the way to 1959, before finally retiring at 37. Then, in 1965, he came back. He was 42 years old and broke. He won a few fights against opponents who had no business being in the same ring as a former champion, and then lost his final bout, a 6-round decision, to Calvin Woodland in Richmond, Virginia, on March 16, 1966. He was 43. His final record stood at 229 wins, 11 losses, and 1 draw, 65 knockouts, 241 total bouts, 1,956 rounds. Outside the ring, Pep's life was a longer and sadder fight. He was married 6 times. His signature line about his domestic life became almost as famous as his boxing. "All my wives were great housekeepers," he would say. After every divorce, they kept the house. He earned over $1 million across his career, a fortune for a featherweight in the 1940s and 50s, and he lost almost all of it. "Fast women and slow horses," he said. He gambled heavily on the ponies, sometimes fighting as often as he did just to fund his habit at the track. He stayed in boxing as a referee and later as a deputy boxing commissioner and inspector for the state of Connecticut. He kept showing up. He kept telling the old stories. He kept pulling that folded newspaper clipping about the no-punch round from his wallet and handing it to young reporters with a grin. But the sport that made him took something in return. In his later years, Pep developed dementia pugilistica, the degenerative brain disease caused by repeated blows to the head. By 2001, he was living in the West Hill Convalescent Home in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, receiving treatment for what his doctors diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease. His last wife, Barbara, cared for him and visited daily. When someone gently suggested that boxing might have caused his condition, Pep reportedly looked confused and said, "But honey, I never got hurt." He died on November 23, 2006. He was 84 years old. He is buried in Rocky Hill, 8 miles south of the Hartford streets, where he once fought other kids for the right to shine shoes. In 1990, Willie Pep was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in its very first class, alongside Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, and Sandy Sadler. The Associated Press named him the #1 featherweight of the 20th century. ESPN ranked him the 5th greatest boxer who ever lived. Burt Sugar put him at #3. The International Boxing Research Organization and BoxRec both rank him as the greatest featherweight of all time. In 2024, a film called The Featherweight, starring James Matteo, told the story of Pep's ill-fated 1960s comeback. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival and drew comparisons to Scorsese. Critics praised it. Almost nobody saw it. $22,000 at the box office, which somehow feels right. Willie Pep was never the one the crowds came to see get hurt. He was the one who made the crowd forget he could be. "First your legs go," Willie Pep once said. "Then you lose your reflexes." Friends, he lost all 3. But he left behind 229 wins, a ghost that still dances in old fight film, and a legend so powerful that people still believe he won a round without throwing a single punch. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but only one fighter in history could make the whole world think it was possible. If you are still here, you are one of us. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another legend of the Iron Era. We will see you in the next one.